The dust had been Clara Thornton's only companion for too long. As her trembling fingers clutched the wilted letter from her deceased husband, she gazed across the unforgiving plains of Arizona Territory. The year was 1885, and Snowflake was a town that offered little mercy to a woman alone, especially one whose empty cradle stood as a monument to her failure. Teresa Patterson dabbed at her eyes as she finished reading the telegram for the third time. 5 years of marriage to Jeremiah had yielded nothing but heartache and an empty nursery. The doctor in Phoenix had confirmed what she'd long suspected: her womb would never bear fruit. Now, with Jeremiah 6 months in the ground, the whispers that had once been confined to parlors and church pews had grown bold enough to follow her down Main Street. "Poor barren widow," they'd say, just loud enough for her to hear. "What use is a woman who can't give a man children?" Teresa had come to Snowflake, Arizona, 3 years prior, when Jeremiah's mercantile business had shown promise. The small settlement, nestled in the high country of Navajo County, had welcomed them with the cautious optimism reserved for newcomers with money and prospects. But as the seasons passed and Teresa's belly remained flat, the welcoming smiles had turned to pitying glances. Jeremiah's death from pneumonia the previous winter had left her with a struggling store, mounting debts, and a community that viewed her as somehow less than complete. At 32, Teresa was considered by many to be beyond her prime, a dried-up spinster despite her marriage. "Mrs. Patterson, I'll need payment for these supplies by the end of the week," Mr. Daniels, the bank manager, said as he stood in the doorway of the mercantile. His eyes held no compassion, only calculation, "or we'll need to discuss foreclosure options." Teresa straightened her spine. "The shipment from Holbrook arrives tomorrow. I'll have your money by Friday." Daniels nodded without conviction and left, the bell above the door jangling with cruel cheerfulness. Teresa leaned against the counter, the empty store echoing her solitude. The mercantile had been Jeremiah's dream, not hers, but it was all she had left. The bell jangled again, and Teresa composed herself quickly, brushing away any evidence of tears. "Madam, I heard you might be looking for help with some deliveries." The man who stood before her was tall, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe. Dust from the trail coated his clothing, but his eyes were clear blue beneath the brim of his Stetson-kind eyes that didn't immediately drop to her midsection with unspoken questions. "I'm Heath Sutton," he continued when Teresa failed to respond. "Just rode in from New Mexico Territory." Handy with horses, wagons, and numbers. Teresa assessed him cautiously. His beard was neatly trimmed, his manner respectful despite the trail-worn appearance. Most importantly, he wasn't from Snowflake, didn't know her story or her shame. "The position doesn't pay much," she said finally. "Just room and board above the store and a small wage when the profits allow." Heath smiled, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Madam, a roof and regular meals is luxury enough after 6 months on the trail." Teresa extended her hand. "Teresa Patterson, the deliveries leave at dawn tomorrow." That night, as Teresa prepared the small room behind the stockroom for her new employee, she heard the whispers from women gathering water at the well outside. "Scandalous, taking in a stranger like that," Martha Wilkins hissed to her companion. "Well, what does she have to lose? It's not like she has a reputation as a proper woman to protect," Louisa Baker replied with a snicker. "No children to consider, after all." Teresa's hand stilled on the fresh linens she was placing on the narrow cot. The words stung, as they always did, but she forced herself to continue her task. Let them talk. She had a business to run. Dawn broke with a spectacular display of pinks and golds over the white mountains. Teresa had been awake for hours, reviewing the delivery orders and calculating what the day's income would mean for the bank payment. She heard Heath moving about downstairs, the quiet efficiency of his movements suggesting this wasn't his first early morning. "Mrs. Patterson," he greeted her as she descended the stairs. "I've hitched the wagon and loaded the first round of deliveries." Teresa blinked in surprise. "You found everything without direction." Heath smiled that dimpled smile again. "The manifest was on the counter. Figured I'd get a head start." The deliveries took them through the small town and out to the surrounding ranches. Heath handled the reins with skill, navigating the rutted roads with ease. Teresa found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the confident set of his shoulders, the gentle way he spoke to the horses, the respectful manner in which he addressed even the crustiest of ranchers. "You've done this before," she observed as they headed back toward town after the fourth delivery. "Spent some time working for a freight company in Santa Fe," Heath replied. "Before that, drove cattle from Texas to Kansas." He glanced at her. "What about you, Mrs. Patterson?" "Always been a shopkeeper." Teresa shook her head. "I was a school teacher back east before I married. Jeremiah, my husband, had grand plans for the mercantile. When he passed last winter, I took over." Heath nodded thoughtfully. "Teaching's a noble profession. Ever think of going back to it?" "Snowflake already has a teacher," Teresa said with a shrug. "Besides, the store is all I have left of him." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon creaking beneath them. As they approached town, Teresa felt the familiar knot forming in her stomach. The gauntlet of judgment awaited her. "Mrs. Patterson," Ethel Williams called from the boardwalk, her voice syrupy with false concern. "How are you managing with your new help?" The pause was deliberate, the implication clear. Teresa felt heat rising to her cheeks. "Mr. Sutton is proving quite capable, thank you," she replied stiffly. "I'm sure he is," Ethel responded with a knowing look at her companions. "A woman alone needs capable hands around her establishment." Heath cleared his throat beside her. "Madam," he addressed Ethel with a tip of his hat, "Mrs. Patterson runs the finest mercantile I've seen this side of Santa Fe. You folks are fortunate to have such a businesswoman in your community." Ethel blinked, momentarily silenced by his direct praise. Teresa felt a rush of gratitude for his intervention. As they continued toward the mercantile, Heath spoke quietly. "People can be mighty quick to judge what they don't understand." "They understand well enough," Teresa replied, her voice tight. "A woman my age should have a house full of children by now." Heath's gaze was thoughtful. "Some of the finest people I've known never had children of their own. My Aunt Emmer raised half the orphans in her town without ever bearing a child herself. Her legacy's walking around on two legs all over Colorado." The simple observation, delivered without pity or judgment, loosened something in Teresa's chest. For the first time in months, she found herself smiling genuinely. Days turned into weeks, and Heath proved himself invaluable. The store's deliveries were always on time, the inventory meticulously maintained. He had a knack for negotiating with suppliers that Teresa lacked, and gradually, the mercantile's ledgers shifted from red to black. "I can pay you a proper wage now," Teresa told him one evening as they sat on the small porch behind the store, the day's accounts balanced and a pot of coffee between them. Heath waved away her offer. "Add it to the store's capital. Winter's coming, and you'll need inventory to see the town through." Teresa studied him in the lantern light. "Why are you helping me like this, Mr. Sutton? You could find better paying work elsewhere." Heath considered her question, his eyes reflecting the golden glow of the lamp. "I've spent most of my life moving from place to place, Mrs. Patterson. For the first time, I feel I might be doing something that matters." His words settled around her like a warm blanket. "You are," she said softly. I don't know what I would have done without your help these past weeks." They shared a smile, and Teresa felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with business concerns. The following Sunday, Teresa attended church as she always did, sitting alone in her usual pew near the back. She was surprised when Heath slipped in beside her just as the service began, his hair slicked back, and his trail clothes replaced with a clean shirt and string tie. Reverend Collins' sermon that day centered on the biblical story of Sarah, who conceived in her old age after a lifetime of barrenness. Teresa felt the congregation's eyes shifting toward her throughout the telling, the message targeted nature obvious to all. Her hands clenched in her lap, knuckles white with the effort of maintaining her composure. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Reverend Collins intoned, his gaze settling directly on Teresa. "Those who are patient and faithful may yet see miracles in their lives." Beside her, Heath shifted uncomfortably. As the congregation rose to sing the closing hymn, he leaned close to her ear. "Seems to me faith ought to be a comfort, not a weapon," he whispered. Teresa felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. She would not give them the satisfaction. As they exited the church, Teresa felt the familiar wall of silence that always greeted her, followed by the hushed conversations that would spring up in her wake. Heath stayed by her side, his presence a shield against the worst of it. "Mrs. Patterson," Reverend Collins called, intercepting them at the bottom of the steps. "I trust you found today's message enlightening." Teresa forced a polite smile. "It was. Thought-provoking, Reverend." "I believe the Lord has plans for all his children," the Reverend continued, his eyes flicking briefly to Heath. "Even those who have not been blessed with children of their own." Heath stepped forward slightly. "Reverend, I've always believed the good book teaches us that judgment belongs to the Lord alone." The Reverend's smile tightened. "Indeed, Mr. Sutton, and what brings you to our humble congregation today?" "Just paying respects," Heath replied easily. "Mrs. Patterson has been kind enough to employ me, and I figured the least I could do was accompany her to worship." The implication that Teresa might need accompaniment protection even hung in the air between them. The Reverend cleared his throat. "Yes, well, we're always pleased to welcome new faces." He nodded stiffly and moved on to greet other parishioners. As they walked back toward the mercantile, Teresa released a long breath. "Thank you for coming, though it wasn't necessary." Heath shrugged. "Seemed like the right thing to do." After a moment's hesitation, he added, "I hope I didn't overstep, speaking to the Reverend like that." Teresa shook her head. "It's been a long time since anyone stood up for me." That afternoon, as Teresa was taking inventory in the stockroom, she heard raised voices from the front of the store. She emerged to find Heath engaged in a tense conversation with Bradley Thompson, one of the wealthier ranchers in the area. "All I'm saying is she'd be better off selling to someone who knows what they're doing," Thompson was saying. "A woman has no business running a mercantile on her own, especially one who's never managed to—" "Mr. Thompson," Heath interrupted, his voice deceptively calm. "Mrs. Patterson has managed to turn this store around in just a few weeks. The books are in the black and every delivery has been on time." Thompson snorted. "Only because she's got you doing the real work, Sutton. Everyone knows it's unnatural, a woman her age living alone above a store. No children, no husband, it ain't right." Teresa stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Mr. Thompson, is there something specific you needed from the mercantile today?" Thompson had the grace to look slightly abashed at being overheard. "Just picking up an order for the ranch," he muttered. "It's ready for you," Teresa replied coolly, retrieving the package from behind the counter. "That will be $4.75. As Thompson counted out the money, he glanced between Teresa and Heath. "You two ought to consider what people are saying in town. Living under the same roof, unmarried, it's causing talk." "Thank you for your concern," Teresa said, sliding his purchase across the counter. "Good day, Mr. Thompson." After he left, Teresa's carefully maintained composure crumbled. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. "Don't let him get to you," Heath said gently. "Men like that measure their worth by how small they can make others feel." Teresa looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close he was standing. "It's not just him. It's the whole town. They've been waiting for me to fail since the day Jeremiah died." She shook her head. "Maybe even before that, when it became clear I couldn't give him children." Heath's expression softened. "Teresa," he said, using her given name for the first time, "not being able to bear children doesn't make you any less of a woman." The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, broke something open inside her. The tears she'd held back for so long spilled over. "I've tried to believe that," she whispered. "But this town, they've made it clear what they think of me." Heath's hand covered hers on the counter, warm and steady. "Then perhaps it's time to consider whether this town deserves you." In that moment, with his blue eyes holding hers and his hand steady on her own, Teresa felt something shift between them, something that both frightened and exhilarated her. The first snowfall came early that year, blanketing Snowflake in white just after Thanksgiving. Business at the Mercantile picked up as people stocked up for winter, and Teresa and Heath worked side by side from dawn till dusk. One evening, as they sat before the small stove in the back room tallying the day's receipts, Heath cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he began, then paused as if searching for words. Teresa looked up from her ledger. About staying on. Permanently, I mean." He met her eyes. "If you'd want that." Teresa's heart skipped. Over the past months, Heath had become more than an employee. He was her confidant, her defender, perhaps even her friend. The thought of him leaving had begun to trouble her more than she cared to admit. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. Heath's smile was warm. "Good. Because I've got some ideas for expanding the business come spring." They talked late into the night, planning improvements to the store, discussing new inventory they might acquire. It felt natural, this partnership they'd formed, as if they'd been working together for years instead of months. As Christmas approached, the mood in Snowflake softened somewhat. Even the most judgmental townsfolk were caught up in the spirit of the season, and Teresa found herself invited to the holiday social at the schoolhouse, the first community event she'd been explicitly included in since Jeremiah's death. "You should go," Heath encouraged when she showed him the invitation. "It might be good to mingle with folks outside of business." Teresa hesitated. "Will you come with me?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications they'd both been careful to avoid. Heath nodded slowly. "If you'd like me to." The night of the social, Teresa found herself spending more time than usual on her appearance. She wore her best dress, a deep green wool that brought out the amber flecks in her hazel eyes, and arranged her chestnut hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical bun. When she descended the stairs to the store, Heath was waiting, dressed in a clean suit she hadn't seen before. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, his voice catching, "you look lovely." Teresa felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Sutton. You clean up rather well yourself." He offered her his arm, and together they stepped out into the snowy evening. The schoolhouse was transformed by pine boughs and candles, the scents of cinnamon and cloves filling the air. A small band played in one corner, and tables laden with food lined the walls. Teresa felt the eyes of the townspeople following them as they entered, but for once the attention didn't feel entirely hostile. "Mrs. Patterson," Mayor Jenkins greeted her, pumping her hand. "Glad you could join us. The mercantile's been running smoothly under your direction, I hear." Teresa nodded, surprised by the acknowledgement. "Thank you, Mayor. We've been blessed with good business these past months." "And Mr. Sutton," the mayor continued, turning to Heath. "I understand you've become quite the fixture in our little community." Heath smiled politely. "Snowflake's been good to me, sir." As the evening progressed, Teresa found herself relaxing. She danced with the schoolteacher, Mr. Collins, and even shared a stilted but civil conversation with Ethel Williams about the Women's Aid Society's plans for the coming year. When Heath finally claimed her for a dance, Teresa felt a flutter of nervousness that had nothing to do with the watching eyes of the townspeople. "Having a good time?" he asked as they moved together to the waltz. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Though I think your presence has influenced how people are treating me." Heath shrugged. "Or maybe they're finally seeing past their own narrow expectations." Teresa wasn't convinced, but she allowed herself to enjoy the moment, the solid warmth of Heath's hand at her waist, the surprising grace with which he led her through the dance. As they walked home beneath a sky brilliant with stars, a comfortable silence settled between them. The mercantile was dark and quiet when they returned, the only sound the creak of the sign in the winter wind. At the foot of the stairs that led to Teresa's living quarters, they paused. For a heartbeat, Teresa thought Heath might kiss her, and she was startled to realize how much she wanted him to. Instead, he took her hand and pressed it gently. "Thank you for a lovely evening, Teresa." "Thank you for accompanying me," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He held her gaze for a long moment before releasing her hand. "Good night." "Good night, Heath." As she climbed the stairs to her rooms, Teresa felt a curious mixture of disappointment and relief. Whatever was growing between them was fragile, undefined. Perhaps it was better not to rush. The new year brought bitter cold and fierce storms that isolated Snowflake for weeks at a time. Heath and Teresa fell into a routine morning spent tending to the store, afternoons devoted to deliveries when the weather permitted, evenings passed in quiet conversation by the stove. They learned each other's stories in those long winter nights. Heath spoke of his childhood on a small farm in Missouri, his father's death in the war, his mother's struggle to keep the family together. He told her of his years as a cowhand, driving cattle up from Texas, and later as a freighter, carrying goods across the territories. Teresa shared her own history, her upbringing in Pennsylvania, her training as a teacher, her courtship with Jeremiah. Hesitantly, she spoke of their attempts to have children, the mounting disappointment with each passing month, the doctor's eventual verdict. "He said my womb was inhospitable," she confessed, staring into the stove's flames. Jeremiah tried to hide his disappointment, but I could see it in his eyes every time another woman in town announced she was expecting. Heath's voice was gentle. "Was that why you came west? For a fresh start?" Teresa nodded. Jeremiah thought a change of scenery might help. "And for a while I believed it too," she sighed. "But my body didn't change with the location." Heath reached across the space between their chairs, taking her hand. "Teresa, I hope you know," he began, then stopped as a sudden pounding on the mercantile's front door interrupted them. They exchanged alarmed glances. It was well past 9, and no one in their right mind would be out in the snowstorm that had been raging since dusk. Heath rose and grabbed the rifle he kept by the back door. "Stay here," he told Teresa, but she was already reaching for her shawl. "I'm coming with you," she said firmly. Together they made their way through the darkened store to the front door. The pounding came again, more urgent this time. "Who's there?" Heath called, positioning himself between Teresa and the door. "Please," a woman's voice called, thin with desperation. Please help us." Heath lowered the rifle and opened the door. A young woman stood on the threshold, snow coating her threadbare coat, her face pale with cold. In her arms was a bundle that Teresa recognized immediately as a swaddled infant. "Please," the woman repeated, swaying slightly. "My baby's sick. The doctor's away and they said you might have medicine." Teresa stepped forward, taking the woman's arm. "Come in, quickly." Heath stoked the stove in the back room. The woman stumbled into the warmth of the store, clutching her baby. As Teresa led her to the back room, she introduced herself in halting English as Maria, explaining that she and her husband had a small homestead several miles outside of town. Their baby boy, just 2 months old, had developed a cough that morning that had rapidly worsened. "My husband, he ride to Holbrook for the doctor, but the storm." Maria shook her head, tears welling in her dark eyes. "I afraid to wait." Teresa gently took the baby from Maria's arms. His tiny face was flushed with fever, his breathing labored and wheezy. She recognized the symptoms. Immediately, her youngest brother had suffered from similar attacks as an infant. "Heath, fetch me the eucalyptus oil and honey from the medicinal shelf," she instructed, "and put on water to boil." While Heath gathered the supplies, Teresa unwrapped the baby and checked him thoroughly. Despite the fever and cough, his color was good, and he responded to her touch with a weak cry. "He's going to be all right," she assured Maria. "We need to clear his lungs and break the fever." Teresa mixed the eucalyptus oil with the boiling water, creating a steam that filled the small room with a sharp, clean scent. She held the baby close to the steam, covering both their heads with a towel to concentrate the vapors. After several minutes, the infant's breathing eased slightly. Next, she prepared a mixture of honey and a few drops of willow bark tincture, carefully administering tiny amounts to soothe the baby's throat and reduce his fever. Throughout the night, she and Maria took turns holding the child near the steaming water, while Heath kept the stove burning and prepared warm drinks for the exhausted mother. By dawn, the baby's fever had broken and his breathing had returned to normal. Maria wept with relief when Teresa placed her son in her arms, his eyes clear and alert for the first time since she'd arrived. "You save him," Maria said simply. "How you know what to do?" Teresa smiled, exhaustion etching lines around her eyes. "I helped raise my younger siblings. My brother Daniel had chest ailments as a baby." Maria studied Teresa's face. "You have children?" The question, asked without judgment or expectation, still pierced Teresa's heart. "No," she said softly. "I cannot have children." Maria nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Then God give you gift instead hands that heal." The simple statement, delivered with complete conviction, struck Teresa deeply. She'd spent so long focusing on what she couldn't do that she'd forgotten the abilities she did possess. Heath appeared in the doorway with fresh coffee. His eyes met Teresa's over Maria's head, and the admiration she saw there warmed her more than the stove's heat. "The storm's let up," he reported. "I can take Maria and the baby home once they've rested a bit more." Maria shook her head. "My Francisco will come looking. Better we wait here." As if summoned by her words, there was a commotion at the front of the store. Heath went to investigate and returned moments later with a snow-covered man who rushed to Maria's side, exclaiming over her and the baby in rapid Spanish. "The doctor from Holbrook is with him," Heath explained to Teresa. "I've shown them in." Dr. Thornton, a middle-aged man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, examined the baby thoroughly. "You've done an excellent job, Mrs. Patterson," he declared. "Your quick thinking likely saved this child's life." Francisco, who spoke more English than his wife, expressed his gratitude repeatedly. "We have little money," he said, "but we pay what we can." Teresa shook her head. "There's no need, I'm just glad I could help." After the family and the doctor had departed, Teresa sank into a chair by the stove, the adrenaline of the night finally leaving her system. Heath sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "You were amazing," he said simply. "The way you knew exactly what to do, how calm you stayed." Teresa shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. "I just remembered what my mother used to do for Daniel." "It was more than that," Heath insisted. "You have a gift for healing, for caring." He hesitated, then added softly, "for mothering." Teresa looked up sharply, expecting to see pity in his eyes. Instead, she found only admiration and something deeper, something that made her heart beat faster. "Heath," she began, unsure what she wanted to say. He leaned forward, taking her hands in his. "Teresa, I've been wanting to tell you something for a while now. Last night, watching you with that baby." He took a deep breath. "I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Teresa felt tears welling in her eyes. "You know I can never give you children," she whispered. Heath's grip on her hands tightened. "I'm not asking for children. I'm asking for you, your heart, your companionship, your remarkable spirit." Teresa struggled to find words. "The town will talk. They'll say you settled for less than a whole woman." Heath's expression hardened. "Anyone who would say such a thing doesn't deserve another moment of your concern." His voice softened. "Teresa, you are the most complete, whole person I've ever known. Your worth isn't measured by whether you can bear children." The tears spilled over then, years of shame and inadequacy releasing in a flood. Heath moved from his chair to kneel before her, gathering her into his arms as she wept. "I love you," he murmured against her hair, "just as you are." When her tears finally subsided, Teresa pulled back to look at him. "I love you too," she admitted, "but I'm afraid." Heath brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Of what?" "Of believing I can be happy, that I'm enough." She shook her head. "I've spent so long feeling broken." Heath's blue eyes were fierce with conviction. "You're not broken, Teresa. You're exactly who you're meant to be." The words washed over her like a benediction, healing places within her that she hadn't realized were still raw. News of the night's events spread through Snowflake with remarkable speed. By the time Teresa and Heath opened the mercantile later that morning, several townspeople had stopped by, ostensibly to purchase goods but really to hear the story firsthand. Maria's baby would have died without Mrs. Patterson's knowledge, Dr. Thornton told anyone who would listen. "She has a natural healing touch." For the first time, Teresa found herself the recipient of admiring glances rather than pitying ones. Women who had previously avoided her now sought her advice on their children's minor ailments. Even Ethel Williams stopped by to inquire about remedies for her grandson's persistent cough. "I hear you're quite the medicine woman," Ethel said, her usual condescension noticeably absent. "My Tommy's been wheezing something terrible." Teresa recommended the same eucalyptus steam treatment she'd used for Maria's baby, carefully measuring out the oil and explaining the procedure. As Ethel was leaving, she paused. "Mrs. Patterson, Teresa, I may have been hasty in my judgments of you." The closest thing to an apology Teresa was likely to get from the proud woman. She accepted it with a gracious nod. That evening, as they closed the store, Heath took Teresa's hand. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her to the back room where a large object stood covered with a canvas tarp. "What is this?" Teresa asked, curious. Heath grinned boyishly. "An early birthday present. I've been working on it in the evenings." He pulled away the tarp to reveal a beautifully crafted cabinet with multiple drawers and compartments, each labeled in Heath's neat handwriting. "Fever remedies, digestive aids, respiratory treatments." "It's a medicine cabinet," Heath explained. "I thought you might want to expand that side of the business. given your knowledge and the town's need." Teresa ran her hand over the smooth wood, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect," she whispered. "There's something else," Heath said, his voice suddenly nervous. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I had planned to wait to do this properly, but after last night—" He took a deep breath and dropped to one knee before her. "Teresa Patterson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small pearl. Teresa's hand flew to her mouth, her heart hammering in her chest. "Heath," she breathed, "are you certain?" "You know what marrying me means." "I know exactly what it means," he interrupted gently. "It means spending my life with the woman I love, building something meaningful together." His eyes held her steadily. "I don't need children of my own to be fulfilled, Teresa. I just need you." Teresa felt the last of her resistance crumbling. This man, this remarkable man, saw her completely and loved what he saw, not as a substitute for something better, not as a compromise, but as a first choice. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." The wedding took place in April, when the snow had melted and the first wildflowers were beginning to dot the hills around Snowflake. To Teresa's surprise, nearly the entire town turned out for the ceremony, the church filled to capacity. Reverend Collins, who had once used his sermons to subtly admonish her, now spoke eloquently of love that transcended conventional expectations. "The Lord's greatest commandment is to love one another," he intoned. In Heath and Teresa, we see this love made manifest, a love that builds up rather than tears down, that accepts rather than judges. Teresa, in a simple cream-colored dress with sprigs of lavender in her hair, felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. As she and Heath spoke their vows, she saw only his face, heard only his voice promising to cherish her all the days of his life. The reception was held in the town square, with tables groaning under the weight of dishes contributed by every household in Snowflake. Maria and Francisco were there with their thriving baby boy, who had been named Theodore after Teresa. Francisco explained proudly. Even Mrs. Williams seemed genuinely pleased for them, pressing a hand-embroidered tablecloth into Teresa's hands. "Every home needs beautiful things," she said, her usual sharpness softened. As the celebration continued into the evening, Heath led Teresa away from the crowd to a quiet corner of the square. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully. He kissed her then, a promise of the night to come. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "You know, I've been thinking about the future." Teresa raised an eyebrow. "Oh." "The mercantile is doing well and your healing work is becoming known throughout the county," he said. "But there are so many children who need homes, who need the kind of love and care you have to give." Teresa's heart quickened. "Are you suggesting?" Heath nodded. "Not right away, perhaps. But someday, when we're ready, I think we could offer a home to children who need one." He cupped her face gently. "Your womb may not bear fruit, Teresa, but your heart is the most fertile ground I've ever known." Tears welled in Teresa's eyes at his words. "You really believe that, don't you?" Heath's gaze was steady, his voice low with emotion. "The town mocked your barren womb," he whispered, "but I know the truth. You've made my heart fertile with love." In that moment, surrounded by the community that had once judged her so harshly, Teresa felt truly whole for the first time in her life. Not because she had changed, but because she had finally found someone who saw her value exactly as she was. The years that followed brought changes to Snowflake and to the Sutton household. The mercantile expanded to include a proper apothecary section, with Teresa's remedies becoming famous throughout Navajo County. Heath's business acumen and Teresa's healing knowledge proved a powerful combination, and they prospered. 3 years after their wedding, they welcomed their first child, not one born of Teresa's body, but of her heart. 6-year-old, Emma had lost her parents to typhoid in a nearby settlement. When Dr. Thornton brought her to the Suttons, the child was withdrawn and fearful, speaking to no one. Teresa approached her with the same patient care she showed all wounded creatures. She didn't push or prod, simply offered quiet presence and gentle constancy. After 2 weeks in their home, Emma spoke her first words to Teresa as she was being tucked in. "Are you my mother now?" the child whispered. Teresa's heart had nearly burst with love. "If you'd like me to be," she answered carefully. Emma had considered this seriously. "I think I would," she decided. By the time Emma was 10, she had been joined by 2 brothers, Samuel, whose mother had died in childbirth, and Jack, whose father had abandoned him after his mother's death. The Sutton home above the Mercantile had been expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Heath adding rooms each time a new child arrived. Teresa discovered that her inability to bear children was, in many ways, a gift to these wounded young souls. She understood what it meant to feel different, to worry about being enough. This understanding allowed her to reach children that others had given up on, to heal hurts that went deeper than physical ailments. The town that had once whispered about her barrenness now spoke with admiration of her generous heart. Women came to her not just for medical advice, but for counsel on matters of the heart and family. Even Ethel Williams, now a grandmother many times over, admitted that Teresa had a special gift for mothering. "Not all mothers birth their babies," Ethel observed one day as she watched Teresa gently bandaging a scrape on Jack's knee. "Some find their children in other ways." Coming from the woman who had once been her harshest critic, the words were especially meaningful. One evening, as Teresa and Heath sat on their expanded porch watching their children playing in the yard, Heath took her hand. "I was thinking about the day I proposed to you," he said. Teresa smiled. "One of the happiest days of my life. Mine too." He squeezed her fingers. "Do you remember how worried you were that you couldn't give me children?" Teresa nodded, looking out at Emma showing her brothers how to make daisy chains. "It seems foolish now." "Not foolish," Heath corrected gently. "You couldn't have known what we'd build together." Teresa leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. "We've been blessed beyond measure." Heath kissed the top of her head. "I told you then that your heart was fertile ground." I had no idea just how right I was. Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Teresa stood at the window of their bedroom, gazing up at the star-filled Arizona sky. Heath came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" He murmured against her hair. "About how life takes us on unexpected paths," she replied. "If someone had told me 10 years ago that this would be my life, a thriving business, 3 beautiful children, a husband who loves me as I am, I wouldn't have believed them." Heath turned her in his arms to face him. "Do you ever regret it, not having children of your own?" Teresa considered the question seriously. "They are my own, Heath, not by blood perhaps, but by choice, which seems an even stronger bond somehow." She touched his face gently. "And no, I don't regret anything that led me to this life, to you." Heath's eyes darkened with emotion. "I thank God every day for bringing me to your door." "As do I," Teresa whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him. As the years passed, the Sutton family continued to grow. Their 4th child, a girl named Hope, joined them when she was just an infant, her teenage mother unable to care for her. By the time Teresa and Heath celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary, they had provided a home to 7 children in total. Though 2 of the oldest, Emma and Samuel, had by then moved on to start their own lives. The mercantile had expanded into the neighboring building, with the apothecary becoming a proper clinic, where Teresa worked alongside a young doctor who had come to train under her. Their reputation for healing and compassion drew people from all across the territory. On the morning of their anniversary, Heath presented Teresa with a leather-bound journal. Inside, he had recorded the stories of each of their children when they had come to the Sutton home, their first words, their favorite things, their triumphs and struggles. "So they'll always know where they came from," Heath explained, "and how much they were wanted." Teresa traced the names written in Heath's careful hand. "It's perfect," she whispered. "The most beautiful gift you could have given me." Heath's eyes crinkled with the smile that still made her heart skip. "Not quite," he said. "There's one more thing." He led her out to the front of the mercantile, where a new sign had been hung overnight. Where once it had read Patterson Mercantile and Apothecary, it now proclaimed Sutton Family Mercantile, Apothecary and Orphan Home. "Heath," Teresa breathed, stunned by the implications. "Are you sure?" He nodded, his expression serious. "I've been talking with the territorial authorities. With our reputation and resources, we can make it official, provide a safe landing place for children who need homes, either temporarily or permanently." Teresa felt overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was proposing. This would change everything. "Only by making official what we've been doing all along," Heath pointed out. "And we wouldn't be alone. Dr. Ellis is fully supportive, and even Mayor Thompson has pledged the town's backing." Teresa looked around at the town square, at the community that had once judged her so harshly for what she couldn't give. Now they were rallying behind her for what she could. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, let's do it." The Snowflake Orphan Home officially opened 3 months later, with accommodations for up to 12 children at a time. What had begun as Teresa and Heath's personal mission became the heart of the community, with townspeople volunteering their time and resources to ensure that no child in need was turned away. Emma, now a teacher at the Snowflake School, returned home to help establish a proper classroom for the orphan children. Samuel, who had trained as a carpenter, built furniture sized especially for little ones. Each of the Sutton children, whether still at home or making their way in the world, contributed to the family's expanding vision. One evening, as Teresa sat on the porch of what had now become a compound of interconnected buildings around the original mercantile, she watched the sunset paint the white mountains in shades of gold and pink. Footsteps sounded on the wooden boards, and she looked up to see Reverend Collins approaching. "Mrs. Sutton," he greeted her, "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Reverend," she replied, gesturing to the chair beside her. "Please join me." The Reverend settled his aging frame into the seat with a sigh. "I've been meaning to speak with you privately," he said, "to offer my apologies." Teresa raised an eyebrow. "Apologies?" The old man nodded, his expression somber. "For my failure many years ago to recognize God's purpose for you." He gestured to the buildings that housed the orphanage, the clinic, the expanded mercantile. "I was so caught up in traditional notions of womanhood that I couldn't see the broader calling on your life." Teresa was touched by his candor. "That was a long time ago, Reverend." "Even so," he insisted, "I caused you pain with my narrow vision, and for that, I am truly sorry." He looked out at the children playing in the yard, some biological siblings, others bound by circumstance and choice. "You've mothered more children than any woman I know, Mrs. Sutton, just not in the way any of us expected." Teresa smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought her to this place. "God's paths are rarely the ones we would choose for ourselves," she observed, "but they lead us exactly where we need to be." The Reverend nodded in agreement. "Indeed they do." That night, as Teresa and Heath prepared for bed in the private quarters they maintained amid the bustle of their expanding household, she recounted her conversation with Reverend Collins. "It means a lot coming from him," Heath acknowledged. "He represents the way the whole town used to think about you." Teresa nodded, brushing out her hair now streaked with silver at the dressing table. "It's strange to think back to those days, how isolated and judged I felt." She met Heath's eyes in the mirror. "How different my life became because you walked through the mercantile door." Heath came to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. Though 2 decades had passed since their first meeting, his touch still sent warmth cascading through her. "I think about that day often," he said. "How close I came to continuing on to Prescott instead of stopping in Snowflake." He bent to press a kiss to the top of her head. "The best decision I ever made was answering that help wanted sign in your window." Teresa turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. "You ever regret it? Not having children of your own blood?" It was a question she'd asked before over the years, always half afraid of the answer. Heath's response had never wavered. "Teresa," he said gently, "every child who has passed through our home has been my own in all the ways that matter." His blue eyes, creased now at the corners from years of laughter and desert sun, held her steadily. "The day I married you, I told you that your heart was fertile ground. Look at the harvest we've reaped together, 5 children we've raised to adulthood. Dozens more who have found temporary shelter under our roof, a legacy of compassion that will outlive us both." Teresa rose from her seat to embrace him, resting her head against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Heath Sutton," she whispered, "more with each passing day." "And I love you, Teresa Sutton," he replied, his arms tightening around her. "The mother of many, the heart of our home." Outside their window, the desert night bloomed with stars, silent witnesses to the fertile love that had transformed not just 2 lives, but an entire community. The town that had once mocked Teresa's Barren womb now stood as testimony to the truth. Heath had recognized from the beginning that the most important fertility was not of the body, but of the heart. And in that truth, Teresa had found not just acceptance, but purpose. Not just love, but legacy, a harvest richer and more abundant than she could ever have imagined.